I mean, first of all, I really want to just thank everybody for having me here today. As Sue Woodbury said, I basically help clients figure out how to communicate with their audiences. And I'm going to bring a little bit of that insight for you today. And hopefully that'll be helpful. And ideally, we'll leave today being able to make maybe a slightly better connection to millennial moms. So where should I? Oh, that's me. Okay. So basically, I've had a relationship with the National Liquor Association actually for about 20 years. I met Douglas Greenaway when I was working at Time Inc. about 20 years ago. And off and on over my career, I've been able to help various different areas of the business to support and help communicate to moms. And Douglas and I have become very good friends. And even though my work today is not connected professionally with WIC, I've been a friend of WIC's, as I said, for 20 years, and it gives me great pleasure. So I really want to thank Sue Woodbury and Susan Greathouse for inviting me here. And I also want to thank everybody else that sort of helped me get prepared for today. And that's Kim McGee and Julie Reeder, who was an amazing Sherpa for me, and Julia, who's I think sitting down there, who helped me with some technical difficulties this morning. So, I do a couple of other things as well. I'm on the research committee for the Content Council, which is a content marketing association, and I'm also a co-chair for the organization New York Women in Communications, and I do that in a programming capacity, and I really just try to help women of all ages and every stage of their career really get the most out of what it is they're doing and make connections and try to create environments like this where everybody can come together and share and learn from each other, because that's really what it's all about. And so I'm not going to read this, but perhaps many of you did, but this was sort of the setup for today. And even as Senator Rosenbaum mentioned, things have changed so dramatically in terms of how people are communicating with each other. It's incredibly difficult to keep up. So people like me, I come and I sort of help brands either commercially, or I've done a lot of work in the nonprofit sector, try to figure out how they might be able to do that a little bit better, with a little deeper insight, with a greater degree of understanding. So how are we going to do that today? Well, I'm going to just sort of see if I can get you to think a little bit like a marketer. And some of you may do that, or think a little bit like a journalist. And basically, doing that, we think about the who, the where, the why, how, and what. And so as a content marketer, as someone that's developing content, that could be video, that could be articles, that could be stories, it could be anything that's there to engage with someone, it always starts with these very, very sort of fundamental principles of storytelling, let's say. So what will it hopefully help you answer? Well, hopefully you walk away with a little bit of, how can I communicate with millennial moms a little bit better? To some of us, we may be there. To some of us, it may be very familiar. And to some of us, it's very, very alien. But all you need is some compassion, which obviously all of you have here today because it's the work that you've dedicated yourselves to. And you need a little bit of curiosity. And these are the principles that I personally live by every day. What I sort of take to be sort of my grounding foundation in terms of how I interact with people, but it's also what I use in my job every day, because I think about if you can empathize with the people that you're trying to communicate with, and you have a degree of curiosity about them, everything else falls into place. And as a marketer, the first thing you have to do is to listen. Because if you don't listen, then don't expect anybody to listen to you. So a few things sort of before we get started. I want to say that the deck will be made available. There's quite a lot of stats in the deck, and I did that deliberately so that I would leave you with something that could be a good resource when you go back to your local communities, if you need to advocate for something, if you're trying to get access to certain sort of channels or marketing communication tactics, or you're thinking about how you're going to build out a communications plan, I'm going to leave you with all of that information. And wherever possible, I've included data for millennial mums, and not just millennial mums or millennials in general, but in some cases, obviously, I've had to do that. I'm trying to make that very clear. I've also tried to dig in, obviously, where there are disparities around income. Some of that's available, some of it's not. But I do want to say that I'm up here to share with you, but I don't profess to be an expert. You're the experts. You're on the front lines. You're doing this every day. But this is what this session is all about. It's about sharing with each other and learning with each other. And that's why it's wonderful that you have, even though it's been a couple of years, this opportunity to come back together. Let's start with the who. Now, I said before, you always have to understand your audience. So let's start with a little bit of a show of hands. So who in the room is a millennial? And you can see the dates up there if you're not sure. All right, that could be a quarter of the room. Okay. And how many are Gen Xers? That's me. All right, a little less. And how many are baby boomers? There we go. Yes, as I thought, quite a lot of baby boomers. I'm not so sure we probably have any from the silent generation. But if you're here, raise your hand. Thank you for being here. Okay. So this is self-described, open-ended about what people think makes them unique by generation, and you can see there's some similarities. And there are quite a few differences. I think the thing that stands out to me more than anything is in the millennial column, the number one thing, and it being 24%. I don't think it's surprising that it's number one, but that it's such an overwhelmingly high number really gives you an understanding as to how important technology is to these digital natives. It really is fundamentally important to all of them. And then, and we'll talk about this in a minute, aspects that are really around sort of self-expression, culture and pop and clothing. And I think this is probably one of the reasons why millennials sometimes get a little bit of a bad rap. I was reading about a report that was done hiring managers and their perceptions of having to hire millennials. And the number one thing that sort of rose to the surface for those hiring managers was that millennials are narcissistic, okay? So now I'm not going to say that they are, because that's a hiring manager's perspective, and many of you in this room are hiring managers, and you can keep those thoughts to yourself. I think it's because some of these other things that are so important to them rise to the surface. Now, there could be some elements as to when exactly this study took place, and it could, if we look forward in time, maybe some of the other attributes will become more important as they age. But let's sort of just set a few stats straight. Okay, they are the biggest generation, and not that long ago surpassed the baby boomers. There are basically just about 75 million. Of those, 46 million are millennial moms. And even though they are, as we all know, struggling with student debt, and when you think about youth households with a median debt of $13,000. That's a really large number to overcome. And even though 38% of them are still living at home, I'm sure many of you baby boomers are very aware of that. I didn't bring it, but I found a really interesting set of greeting cards that Bloomberg Business recently just launched. Look them up. They're intended for your millennial children that will not leave the house. Very funny. But over 80% of them say that they either currently have enough money or that they believe that they will, and that they are the most upbeat generation at this moment in their life, even when compared back to where prior generations were at this point in their life than any other generation, which is just fascinating to me. And so as a marketer, what that leads me to, and I'm going to give you a bunch of these little messaging implications, it means lead with the optimism. And we're going to walk through a number of different stats here that many of you are very aware of in terms of the stresses that are on these young mums and the types of things that actually make those stresses begin to pile up. Talk about those a little bit, but at the end of the day, 80% are more upbeat, and so lead with the optimism. The next thing is that this sense of, again, going back to self-expression and diversity. Certainly the most diverse generation that there has been. This notion of almost everybody kind of having a tattoo at the moment. I'm not going to ask the question of the millennials in the room, how many of them have tattoos, but 38% have a tattoo, and of that, almost 50% have 2 to 5, and 8% 6 or more. So it is absolute commonplace at this point. And then nearly 25% have a piercing other than in their earlobe. So there is a comfort level with sort of the look and feel of a generation that for those of us that are not in it might look outrageous or in some respects potentially disrespectful, but that is not the case, and all of us have to recognize that. And then the fact that 43% of millennials are non-white means that you really do need to include visual diversity. And I know in Oregon you may have, I've done most of my sort of WIC experiences have been in New York and Philly and Chicago, which have much higher sort of instances of racial diversity, but it is still incredibly prevalent and mainly actually being driven right now by immigration. So this, they are on track, to be the most educated generation today. And 60% of millennial women will have at least some college education, more than men, and that is staggering. There's this embracing of the geekdom, which I love, and this acceptance, and it sort of gets back a little bit to that diversity thing too, sort of an acceptance of different shapes and sizes. And when I was growing up, it was so much about looking a certain way, that it's so refreshing that this is sort of commonplace. And to me, the implication here is that you can't talk down to her. And even if it's not a higher education or such a formal education, the smarts that the young women have today, because of what they've been exposed to from such a young age, means that they're very, very savvy. But there are some very pressing, stark realities. This idea that there's a true decoupling of marriage and childbirth is a very, very powerful one. 40% of all births are to unmarried couples. That is much higher than it was in 1980. In 1980, it was only 18%. So that's pretty dramatic. You can see on the chart there the implications that race play into that. Even if they're cohabiting, I think the stats, only 7% are in households where the parents are cohabiting. So, this has implications on stresses and happiness that we'll talk about in a minute. But I think what it means from a marketing perspective is you have to acknowledge that this woman is doing it all, doing all of it. And I think what's interesting too is, this is a quote from Isabel Sawhill from the Brookings Institute. I'm just going to paraphrase, but she says here that unwed childbearing is more stigmatized among the better educated or the more elite, and doesn't have the same, is not stigmatized amongst the poor or less educated, but that is rapidly changing. So it's a pervasive and going to be a situation that the entire nation is going to need to figure out how it's going to sort itself out and work with. It's just putting much more pressure on these moms. And so the pressure adds up because she's working. 64% of mothers with children under 6 years of age are in the workforce. Now that may not be work full-time, but that's some sort of working outside the house. And for 40% of families, with just children in general, mum is the sole or primary breadwinner. This, going back to sort of the stresses that this adds to her, almost 40% of mothers who work full-time say it's very difficult to work and balance home and family. Very, very difficult. But what this means, I think, from a messaging perspective, is don't assume she's in the kitchen. Don't assume that she's got perhaps more time to do household chores or any of those things. She's pulled in many, many directions, and you have to represent her visually and in every perspective, understanding what a multifaceted, multitasker, hard worker that she is. I'm sure all of us in the room feel the same way. And she didn't grow up with sort of this perfect environment with the sort of June Cleavers and the Donna Reeds of the world, right? She grew up with icons like Patty Chase from My So-Called Life, who was the breadwinner of the family, other icons that were sort of in dual household families, and then these mums like Molly Weasley and obviously dear Marge Simpson that just have managed to sort of thrive in the chaos, and this notion that, mums can kind of have it all and somehow attain some sort of perfection is, thank God, been absolutely thrown out the window. And there's a fundamental sort of comfort level with of living in chaos and trusting somehow that you're going to be able to navigate through it, and ultimately you'll figure out how to do the right thing. So as a marketer, you've got to keep it really real. So what about dad or the partner if he happens to be in the picture? Well, the roles are kind of converging in a way. We've got, if you read the slide, you've got sort of one thing happening on the one side and one thing happening on the other side. But nearly half of two-parent households sort of have both mums and dads working, and they're both pitching in to a larger degree than they ever were before. Millennial dads are more likely to do things like laundry, shop for groceries, and all of those things. But while dads definitely are doing a little bit more, that has not taken any pressure off of her at all. Or she's just continuing to do more. Thank goodness he's starting to pitch in a little bit. But I love this Chores Wars on the right here, working mother study, which probably maybe puts it at a little bit more perspective of what's really happening. So we may not be really there yet, but there is an impetus. And there is the beginnings of that. And certainly millennial dads, for the most part, want to be more involved. And what that means from a marketing perspective, are gone are the days of people wanting, young women wanting to see the bumbling dad or the dumb dad. They want to see a competent dad. So understanding that dad's not always in the picture, when he is represented, he needs to be respected. He needs to be shown as a competent partner. I have a video to show, but I think I'm going to skip this video, Julie, in the spirit of time. And if anybody comes to one of my breakout sessions, I'll show it there, because it's actually a good one by Glad that actually shows a dad in a very sort of positive, competent, but humorous line. So moving on, a few things, attitudes towards food. Obviously, the mobile phone has really transformed how these mums are shopping. Many of them are using the phones while they're shopping, nearly 40%. It's wonderful to hear that there's an app in Oregon State. I think from what I know, there are various states that are sort of trying to adopt apps and sort of getting them to various sort of degrees of competency. But it's an area that you really need to go. Apps like iBotter, I don't know, I'd be curious, how many of you in the room are familiar with that app? Yeah, mainly the millennials, I'll make a note for the rest of you. One of the things about that app that I think works very well is there's a sharing component. There's sort of almost a gamification component, that if you use a coupon, you can then invite your friends to use a coupon, and if more of your friends use a coupon, then others get benefits. So there's sort of an aggregation there and a sort of little bit of a gamification feature that works very, very well. And she's a very smart shopper. And this is true of millennial mums, no matter what income level. She is going to look for a bargain. It makes her feel smart. It makes her feel empowered. And so as marketers, you need to recognize that you need to show her the value. Don't just tell her, really show her and demonstrate what that does for her financially and what value that really does for her. She's smart, she wants to know, and she wants to be empowered. Attitudes towards food, sorry. 66% say themselves alone do the grocery decision. So that the converse of that is obviously about 40%. Someone else is involved in the decision making. That could be their kids, that could be a partner, it could be their parents if they're still living at home. It's often a shared decision, and I'm sure many of you in the room that are obviously living and breathing this every day know and acknowledge that. But I think the more one can educate and just be cognizant of the fact that even though you may be sitting down and consulting this woman one-on-one and giving her guidance about what to buy when she gets in the store, she's got a lot of other pressures around her that are influencing those decisions. Healthy eating is something that's still very, very important. This is a trend that we've seen for a number of years. It actually also goes beyond income levels. I'm sure there's an awful lot of education that is still required, but there's beginnings of a fundamental shift in society whereby people are beginning to really understand that what you eat actually has a huge impact on your health and wellness. It seems obvious to many of us, But to many people, that is still a very alien concept, that what you put in your body actually affects how you feel, how you sleep, your mood, and all of those things. And I think the message here is that give her that information because she should be open and receptive to receiving it. And at the end of the day, from a messaging standpoint, give her healthy recipes because she's looking for them. What are her priorities? Well, millennial moms overwhelmingly say that being a good parent is the number one thing that's most important to them. And that is very, very wonderful and heartwarming. And it is, as the old J&J campaign used to say, having a baby changes everything. And it really, really does. And this quote from Stacey DeBravo from Florence Central, it's like flicking a switch. And millennial moms have a baby, they begin to align themselves away from their tattooed millennial friends and they're thinking about music and experiences and where they're going to go to sort of the group that's thinking about how to take care of their child and how to take care of their family. So really make sure to encourage her to make it her own. She really wants to feel as though she is in control and empowered of this thing that's really, really important to her. And you have an incredible opportunity to fuel that desire and give her some praise along the way. Which sort of is addressed here in terms of how is she doing? Well, not surprising, millennial moms think they're doing great. I think this is a little bit of a reflection of, a society that's grown up with everybody getting a trophy, everybody really getting a lot of pats on the back. That is not a bad thing. It is never a bad thing to have positive reinforcement and to think that you're doing a good job. And really sort of dispelling some of the negatives that can very easily come into play because they really care about what other people think. 90% who are married or cohabiting say it matters a lot what their partner thinks. It matters a lot what their parents think. And even over 50% say it really matters a lot what their friends and community think. So when they come into your office, they are looking for reassurance. They are looking for you to tell them that they're doing a good job. And they're looking for you to help them, and we'll talk about this in a minute when we get into social media, dampen the fears of them not being able to sort of keep up with the Joneses, if you will. So don't be afraid to give her a pat on the back and tell her she's doing a great job. Even if in that moment she's not, and you need to redirect her, a little positive reinforcement goes a long, long way. But is she happy? And this is really tricky, and I'm sure all of you that are on the front lines, struggle with this as you have women that come into your offices that are enthusiastic and positive and looking for help, and those that come in that really are beaten down and really are struggling and really possibly are at their wits' end, which is what is so remarkable about what all of you have the ability to do every day in your lives is try to perhaps just in small increments turn that around a little bit. Over 50% are saying it's rewarding and enjoyable. And those with younger children tend to be happier. And that's true. I've seen that for the last sort of 15, 20 years that I've been looking at stats around mums and parenting. But when you start to dig and you look at income and you look at whether she's working or not, those things really do have a significant impact on how she feels about things and her happiness. So the opportunity is there. But when she walks in the door, she may be dealing with a lot of things that are very challenging. And when you think about religion, which is kind of a very interesting thing, only 18% of millennials are currently report attending religious services, and that's down from about 26% of boomers at that same age, sort of looking at comparison over time. Something's probably going to need to either bring them back into those communities or supplement or replace that support in those communities, because there is a direct effect on feelings of sort of satisfaction and worthiness when you take time out, whether it's for religious reasons or even just for community connectedness reasons that have a very, very positive impact. So I think, that stat of 25% say that they cry alone. I mean, that's just pretty tragic, but I think the best thing to know is that, you're here for them, but acknowledge that it's hard. So it's that balance of sort of leading with the positive, but also not forgetting to acknowledge that this is not easy. Okay, so that was an awful lot about the who, because my goodness, it's the most important thing, and it's complicated. So let's think a little bit about the where. So we spoke about this, we kind of talked about it a little bit. Everybody knows it, everybody's got them. She's tethered to the phone. It is absolutely the thing that helps her juggle. It helps her know where she needs to be, when she needs to be there, stay connected to anybody in her family, friends, anybody. She's got 3.5 social media accounts. She's on Facebook multiple times a day. I mean, 92%, that's virtually everybody. I'm surprised everybody in the room is not on their phones. Thank you, I appreciate the fact that you're giving me your attention. I understand that you'll walk out and immediately you'll need to reconnect. And of course, we know we've got stats up here for Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter, which are still the most common, but there are so many of these platforms to be considerate of. You're sleeping by the phone, you're doing more than sleeping, you have your phone. It's an interesting world that we live in, that it has just become an integral part of what we do. I mean, it's not going away. And I think this stat down here on the left is kind of interesting. Only 13%, this is Pew, only 13% of all Americans today don't use the internet. That's a very small number, and of that, only 5% are in the millennial age range. So if we were ever in doubt, now obviously we know that there are certain rural pockets where internet access is still out of people's reach, but for the most part we have arrived at a place where it is pretty much ubiquitous. So if you're not already, and as I know many of you are, make sure you're figuring out ways to communicate to her through her phone. And texting is definitely the method the preferred method. And you're going to have to figure this out pretty soon, because the generation that's coming after this generation, like my daughter that's 17, email is kind of alien to her, okay? She really has problems with email and will only communicate via text and, and messaging and all that other stuff. So as a community, as marketers, as people who definitely need to sort of communicate to these women, we need to figure this out quickly. And you're not the only ones trying to figure this out. Everybody's trying to figure this out. And she's always on social media. I got confused with the last statement, but yes, on here all the time, checking Facebook, watching TV, and watching TV through the internet as well. Not watching regular TV. 17.4 hours on her social networks. That's nearly 4 more hours than non-millennial moms. That's a significant number. So she's pretty much always on. So you definitely need to begin a social conversation if you're not already. And that means not only just putting information out there because it's where she's at, but it means inviting her into the conversation because that's what she's comfortable with. She's comfortable with a two-way communication. That's not an easy thing to manage logistically, but it's something that needs to be done. So she's connected, but at what cost? And this is what I was referring to a little bit, sort of tying back to before. It brings with it pressure. It brings with it pressure. There's this sense of feeling always judged. There's a sense of being on display. There's this ideal of needing to live up to seemingly being perfect. When you're seeing sort of other families or friends or whomever sort of posting pictures and everybody looks happy and they're out doing something constructive and they look like they're doing the things that you wish you were doing when you're stuck in the house trying to juggle between, am I going to put another load of laundry in or am I actually going to clean that bathroom? I mean, these are the things that most of us are actually doing every day, and then with the guilt of thinking, what else should I be doing with my kids today? Can I get that kid off the Xbox? But I've got so many other things to do. How am I going to take time out to do that? And social media really shines a light on this and makes it very, very challenging. And she can really feel inadequate about things, which goes back to make sure you pat her on the back. Make sure you tell her she's doing a good job, because it's a fallacy, right? The majority, 50%, are really only sharing the good stuff, right? So it's a very, very tainted view of what's actually happening. So don't judge her, don't play into that. She's got enough judgment going on, even though it may not be intended, from everything else that's happening around her. So why? Why do we need to talk to her, apart from all the reasons that we just sort of talked about, of course? Well, one of the reasons, because she's very well connected and she's highly influential. So anything you tell her, she's liable to tell somebody else. So if you can give her a nugget of really useful information, she's going to tell someone else. They may taste like someone else, and before you know it, that little nugget of wisdom that you were able to impart has now been communicated to her network. And that's very, very powerful. And likewise, she's very influenced by her friends about what they have to say. And so the more valuable, constructive, helpful information that we can impart, the better off that she's going to be. People are asking her for her opinions, she's giving them, and she's very, very comfortable doing that. I mean, that's just part of what she does every day. I don't know that I've ever done that. I might have, clicked a star rating possibly if it was very, very easy for me, but it's just not in my DNA. It's just not in my nature to do that. And yet for her, it's commonplace. She's giving a service. It's part of sort of what she's going to do when she wakes up every day. And as I said, she's got lots of close friends that she's going to share this information with. So make it easy for her. Make it easy for her to share. If you're packaging up a great piece of information, it might be on nutritional values, it may be a how-to, it may be a healthy recipe, whatever it might be, do it in such a way that you're giving it to her so that she can share it. And that's why it's really got to be digital. And if you need to give it to her in printed form, make sure you stop her and make her snap a picture of it and text it to herself immediately, right? Make it and easy to share. Because it's in her DNA. I mean, she's a digital native. She's been doing this for a very, very long time. 70% of millennial moms are renting or streaming on Netflix. They prefer to watch most of their TV shows this way. And she's really going to the internet at every moment to do the things that she needs to make her life easier for herself. When you go back to thinking about multitasking, the lack of time that she has, she's really looking for solid solutions. And one of them, when you look over here, the second most important thing that she's going to the internet for, it's for food and recipes. That's a wonderful thing for all of you, that she's open and that she's looking. You need to be the ones that are giving her that information and showing her how easy it is to integrate recipes into the WIC program, and how what you're providing her is actually enabling her to get food on the table more quickly in an easier fashion. If you can do that to her, that's really, really helpful. But you can't assume you have her undivided attention, as we all know. 74% of millennial moms say they use different media devices simultaneously. She's probably watching television, or she's at work on her PC if she's working, and she's got her phone open, and she's juggling between social media platforms and sort of watching a television program at the same time. All of these things are happening at once. I can't say it enough. There are a lot of marketers out there in the world today that wish they had the type of desire for something that's so fundamental to what you have to offer, that connects to something that mums really, really want and are looking for all the time. It does not go away. And she's looking for parenting advice. 77% say that the internet has actually helped them become a better parent. It's helped them uncover activities, find quick tips and advice, connect with other moms. So she's going there, whether you like it or not. And as we all know, some of that advice is not so good. And her ability to distinguish sometimes between what's good and bad, I do believe that native millennials are actually pretty damn savvy at figuring out what's good and what's not. But there are a lot of deceptive practices out there, and there's also a lot of really bad information, as all of us are aware of. And so acknowledging that she's going to do this is very important, but really helping her understand sources to go to and giving her information that you know and you believe in is credible is really important. So when you're putting information out there, just make sure it's really easy for her to find. Make sure she can navigate to it easily and it's clearly marked, and you're using search and all of the other digital techniques to make sure that things are going well for her. So how do we do this? How do we take all of this and then package it up together and do it in such a way that we're going to make a connection, that we're going to engage, that we're going to get her listening to us and engaging in a dialogue? Well, it really comes down to fulfilling basic needs. This may be something that you think about every day. It may be something that you've never thought of. But this is fundamental. This is fundamental about human beings and has been true forever. We have very rational needs and we have emotional needs. And the quicker we can figure out what the person we're talking to, what their needs are, both rationally and emotionally, the easier our job is in communicating with them, in building a connection, in starting a dialogue, in being able to share and actually learn and grow together. And so the way that sort of messaging and content can do this is in a number of different ways. Oh, sorry, I was not on the right slide. going back to sort of both sides of the brain here. And the way that one can do this from a messaging and content standpoint is really thinking about fulfilling the rational needs in these three ways and the emotional needs in these ways. And let's look at these for a second. So utility, this is really like the appointment reminders. These are, Google Docs. These are barcode scanners. These are all the things that actually make everyday life simpler for mom. And if you can, in any small way, provide her with these kinds of tools and communications and information, you're fulfilling on a very rational need for her. Information. This is really news. This is like what's happening today, what's the weather, or where do I need to go later, what's happening in my community is all the traffic apps and things like that. Very, very important to her. Education or enrichment, work that the Khan Academy has done, what may be happening week to week in my pregnancy. These are things that really support also this great sort of rational need to have information. And then moving to the more emotional, and this is where social media plays such an important role, and this is about personal identity. We used to live in smaller communities where everybody was more connected, and we had an identity that was about sort of where we came from, maybe ethnicity, our family heritage, the people that we see out on the street that are connected back to our parents and our grandparents. And, most of us today don't have that. So we're looking for how do we validate ourselves? And people are doing that through social media, which is where they're sort of wearing their identity on their sleeve, if you will. And this is where, WIC does have some issues. When there are certain populations that feel as though participating in WIC is a stigma to them, and they're used to anything and everything that they do, posting about it, sharing about it, that's a hurdle that needs to be overcome. The work that I've done with the National WIC Association for the national campaign and the branding work, one of the main objectives there for that work was to really try to figure out how can we, and it will take a fair amount of time, figure out how we can destigmatize so that when she does go into a WIC clinic and she has a positive experience, she does want to post about it, she does want to share where she is, she wants to make that part of her personal identity. Some women are doing it, some are afraid to. And then community, which is one of the things that you clearly give her that can be done both virtually and obviously in the real world. And entertainment, not everything needs to be devoid of humor. We all need to have a good sense of humor about ourselves. It's important that we remember that because it's part of what we need as human beings to keep us motivated and to keep us happy. And then diversion. We all need a little diversion, and women especially over-index in games like this. I must say, I still play Candy Crush. I think I'm on, let me see, what level am I on? I'm on level 546. I have no idea if that's, I'm not a sharer, so I don't know if that's sort of high or low. But I need my diversion every now and then. I need something that gives me a little bit of time out. And these women need that as well. They need to know that everything is not work. And sometimes it's okay to decompress and just do something for yourself. And they need inspiration. And sorry, back to the recipes again. But they need inspiration and they need aspiration. And so They need to feel as though there are things that are that you're striving for in life, even though it may not be perfect today. Okay, and the what? So sort of to recap a little bit, these are all the implications that I've sort of talked about a little bit today. And then it's important to sort of see how some of that might come together. And I'm going to share with you an example of a video that I think targeted millennial mums and did a really good job. Yeah. So that was developed by a breast cancer charity. And they really wanted to get a how to keep it real video out into social networks, and had the issue of the censorship of female nipples not being able to be shown. And this is how they worked around it. They got 48 million views and over 700,000 shares. And this man boobs for boobs became a real movement. And what I love about it is it hits on so many of the things that really resonate. It's keeping it real, nobody's getting talked down to, it's very how-to and practical. It's starting a conversation because it then invited, and there are lots of them online that are very funny, of young women finding someone in their family or someone they know to be as Henry, I think it was, as Henry was in the video, and sharing their own, and made it very shareable. So it's a wonderful example. Also, it was not, that was not expensive to produce. That was not a high-tech video that cost a lot of money. And it was a very, very powerful way of sort of getting some very important messages out there. I just love that example. Let me do a little time check. Okay, we're probably in good time. I just love that. I just thought that was very clever and very entertaining. And even though it's sort of poking fun a little bit, it's doing it in I think quite a genuine and heartwarming way. So what else? Well, what else? Well, that is actually up to all of you, right? I want to leave you kind of with just thinking about what else can you do? Where are the creative little pockets of things that can be done that are not expensive, that ultimately sort of deliver on some of these things and enable you to, you have such precious time when these women come in to the facility, but they're there and accessible to you at every moment when they walk out the door, because they're connected to you through their phones. And so I just don't want you to forget that. So just sort of to summarize, communicate via the channels she's most comfortable communicating via. So that's, via text and through social media, and understand that that's the way she's comfortable. And if you try to give her a ring on the phone, she might not know what to do. She doesn't even really understand why you would say ring on the phone. Because, it just used to be that phones rang. They don't ring anymore. There's all kinds of things like that just don't, expressions that just don't, hold true anymore. Whatever you tell her, she's probably going to tell somebody else. That's very powerful. That's got positive and negative implications, but remember that. Invite her into a social conversation if you can. I know that there are certain restrictions, that there are certain things that everybody has to be cognizant of, but find a way to do that if you can. And she really does want your advice. She really does. She just wants it and wants to know that she can do it her way. You've got to give her that self-expression to make it her own. Otherwise, she'll turn off from you. And give her ways to save time. Obviously money, but save time. Time is her most precious commodity. You know, even though motherhood is really, really important to her, as we saw, she really wants to be a good mum. Don't forget that she's a multi-dimensional woman, and she's got a lot of other things on her plate, you know, you've got to recognize that. And as we said before, you do need to acknowledge her stress and that this is hard, but play to her aspirations. Lead with the optimism, lead with the positive. And then at the end of the day, just be honest, be transparent, keep it real. She can handle it. You know, don't be afraid to tell her, you know, how it is, because she needs to know. And you're the best ones to tell her, quite honestly. You need to be there for her to tell her sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that she can actually cherish the positive moments of being a mom, which, as we know, is the most wonderful job that anybody can have, but comes with enormous baggage. Thank you for that.